It's almost Christmas, and for this reason I've decided today to bring you along the painting of something that has a little bit these wintry Christmas vibes. And so for today we are going to paint this painting where there are some cotton flowers and some berries, red berries, together with some green leaves. In this painting we are going to practice how to use watercolor paints, but I will also show you how you can use your gouache paints, if you have them available, to create something that really stands out. My name is Luisa and this is the Lulu Blue Studio. Let's start painting together. We start to paint this flower composition from these main flowers, these cotton flowers that are in white color. And for this reason I'm taking a little bit of white gouache. Gouache is a type of paint very similar to watercolor. You can use it exactly in the same way, but it's a little bit more opaque, so you see the paper underneath a little bit less. And I have mixed with my white gouache a little bit of brilliant opera rose, just to give to these flowers that usually are white in nature a little bit more this wintry, Christmassy vibe. You can decide to mix with your white gouache any other color that you have on your watercolor palette, but you can also just use the white gouache as it is, or any other very light mixture of just watercolor paint that you have available on your color palette. I'm using a flat brush and I am just using mainly the side of this brush and the belly of this brush to create the shape of these flowers. I keep adding on my color palette some white gouache and I mix it with a little bit of opera rose to create different color mixtures of this light pink paint to create the shape of these flowers. I want these cotton stems to be sort of the protagonist of this flower composition, and therefore these are going to be the elements that are created as the biggest elements in this flower composition. I am adding these flowers starting from the bottom of the page and going higher to the left upper corner of this page, and I'm taking care to change the color value and to add a little bit more opera rose here and there in the mixture with the white gouache in order to create different mixtures of this pink that create the head of these flowers. At this point, the overall shape of the flowers is created. We let the paint dry, and with a round brush we start to create the stems of these flowers. The stems of these flowers, I looked at the reference picture, are in dark brown, and therefore just using the tip of my round brush, I mix on my color palette some burnt umber and a little bit of yellow ochre to start to create these long stems that connect all the flowers and create a connection in the whole composition. I use just the very tip of the brush and I do not add too much pressure in order to create these stems. I also like to see how the brown blends into the light pink of the flowers, and therefore I allow some of these darker pigment, this burnt umber brown color that I am using to create the stems, to actually blend into the lighter soft pink colors of the heads of these flowers. If you don't like the brown to blend as much as I have done with my flowers, you can always wait for the heads of your flowers to be completely dry before adding your brush strokes in brown color. This is up to you, and this is based on the effect that you want to achieve on your floral painting. With the same brush, I also started to add some branches to these stems, and I located these branches where I want the leaves also to be placed. And at this point, I take back my flat brush, the same brush that I used to create the heads of these flowers, and I take from my color palette a little bit of Sap Green, and I mix it with a little bit of gray ink that I have in the dark jar that you see on the screen. Quite simply, the base for these leaves is a light mixture of grey ink with a little bit of Sap Green and green earth that I have on the color palette, in which I add some Cobalt Green dark to add some contrasting brush strokes in dark color. I also started to mix on the color palette some yellow ochre with a little bit of green, and with this dark color mixture I add to the leaves through some wet on wet technique some brush strokes that are going to blend and to dry and create some beautiful effects when the painting is going to be completely dry. Remember that to give movement to your flower compositions is always a good idea to add on the first layer, for example, of wet paint, for example, the first layer of the leaves, some contrasting brush strokes, for example, in darker color, but it can also be in a color completely different, just to create these effects that you cannot control and that are going to create a unique painting every time you're going to add paint to your paper. And I keep using the same brush to add leaves also in the bottom part of this page. In particular, I noticed that here there is quite a big white space, and for this reason in this area I'm going to start to add more leaves compared to the upper part of this page. I mix while the leaves are still wet some more concentrated azomatin green yellow, which is a type of green that I really like because it's a type of green that goes towards the yellow color, and mixed together with cobalt green dark and sap green really is able to give some light to the whole composition. I'm using the side of my flat brush when I want to create leaves in small size, while instead I use the belly of my brush when I want to create leaves that are bigger in size. When I was a beginner watercolor painter, I remember that I was struggling to find the right balance of big and small leaves to paint in a flower composition. I remember that I always tend to create big leaves in my flower compositions, but then with practice I started to realize that the best flower compositions are created when there is some even space between the leaves, and some leaves are in big size while other leaves are in smaller size. So always keep in mind to find a balance and alternate big brush strokes with smaller brush strokes when you create your leaves. And now it's the time to start to add details on this flower composition. And what I start to do is to mix my gouache color, the yellow ochre and brown color of my gouache color palette, to start to create these brown leaves in very dark color that are very typical of these cotton flowers. I'm using gouache because, as I said, gouache is a little bit more opaque compared to watercolor, and I really want these brown leaves to be on top of the flowers that I've created in first place. These leaves, if you look at any reference picture of these cotton flowers, are sort of leaves that are hugging the base of the flower, and they are going to be created in different areas on top of all of these white flowers, and are sort of going around the whole body of this flower, of this cotton flower. So some leaves, you're gonna notice them and they're going to be put in the front of the body, as I did in this flower, and some others are in the back part, so you only see some tips of these small leaves that are hugging these flowers. And I use this same technique to add these details also on other flowers that I have created in this flower composition. If you are a beginner watercolor artist, I'd like to remind you that I've created my course that is called Floral Art Quick Start, and you can have a look at the course by clicking on the link in the description down below. In this course, I really dive into topics such as flowers and leaf placement. I also speak about how to build layers and how to choose a cohesive color palette for your flower compositions. And I also give you some composition tips on how to create beautiful and flowy flower compositions. Check out Floral Art Quick Start at the link in the description down below. Back to our painting, if you don't have available any brown gouache to create the stems and the leaves of this flower composition, don't worry, you can just create these same elements with some brown color that you have on your color palette. For example, burnt umber if you have it, or you can mix some yellow ochre if you have it with Mars black, and create a dark, thick color that you can take with your round brush and start to create these leaves in the same way. The leaves you're going to create are going to be a little bit less opaque than the ones that I'm creating in this flower composition, but you can really create and obtain a similar effect. I like to use gouache when I want to create some thick blending effects, and also when I want to create maybe something that is more visible on the flower composition compared to other parts. Since gouache is less transparent, you can create with this type of paint some details that are outstanding and that are really dragging the eyes of the observer. I really like to mix watercolor paints with gouache in order to create different watercolor effects, some parts that are more outstanding compared to others, and really play with these different type of paints. And if you're interested, let me know in the comments below. I am really willing to show you what are some of the effects that you can obtain when you mix watercolor paints with gouache. Back to our painting, in this moment I noticed that I wanted to add a touch of red color to this whole composition, and therefore I started to add these red berries, which are created mainly with a mixture of Scarlet Red and a little bit of Opera Rose, because I've used the Opera Rose to create the base of the flowers. I create a sort of link by using for these red berries also an underneath shade of Opera Rose, because I'm using this Opera Rose as a mixture with Scarlet Red. And this is also the reason why I've decided to create the cotton flowers with a mixture of white gouache with a little bit of Opera Rose, because I knew I wanted to add even the red berries, and this color could be a sort of link between all the components in this flower composition. To make this watercolor flower painting more realistic, I'm using this round brush in size 6 to create these red berries, but I'm also keeping in mind to have them in different sizes and shapes. With the same brush, then, I also keep adding some brown brush strokes to add the connection of the branches that start from the bottom part of the page. It is adding these short brush strokes in brown color that I am able to give a flow to the whole composition. So these are fundamental elements in this flower composition, although they are very small details, I would say, compared to the main flowers. And then I look at the whole composition, and with my flat brush I just add a few more leaves where I think that the whole composition is missing some green elements. I'm using the side of the brush just to create very quick and small brush strokes, and I keep in mind to change the color values and to add more contrasting brush strokes, for example in Azomatin green yellow, to create some leaves that are a sort of pop in color compared to the darker leaves that I've created in the first layer. I take at this point my round brush in size 6 from Silver Black Velvet, and I take some white gouache and I mix it with a little bit of Brilliant Opera Rose to start to create a little bit of details on the flowers. I basically mix a color that is very similar to the base of these cotton flowers, and then using just the tip of the brush or the belly of this brush, I create these quick brush strokes to enhance the shape of these flowers. You can decide to add these brush strokes on all of your flowers, your cotton flowers, or just on a few flowers and leave some other that are completely created just with one layer of paint. This is up to you, and you can decide that based on the final effect that you want to achieve. You can also decide to add this type of layers on your leaves too. In my case, I've decided to keep the leaves as simple as possible, just to create a contrast between the flowers that are more detailed and the leaves that are just created with one layer of paint. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to check out Floral Art Quick Start if you are a beginner watercolor artist and you would really like to improve quickly your watercolor skills. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope to see you in my next video. Have a good holiday season!